It's kind of like out of sight, out of mind is the way it's been with the printer endpoints. They've grown up in supply chain largely in procurement, and folks don't understand, business executives don't understand that across almost every industry, the printer endpoints are 20% of their network endpoints, at least. And 99% of them are vulnerable.
Hello and welcome to In the Spotlight with Quo Circa, the definitive podcast on digital disruption in the print industry. This series is brought to you in collaboration with Microsoft Universal Print. I'm Louella Fernandes, CEO of Quo Circa, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jim La Roe, CEO of Symfion. We'll be talking about the concept of print fleet cybersecurity-as-a-service and how their offering provides a vendor-agnostic approach to closing the print security gap. So welcome to the show, Jim. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Louella. It's great to be here.
So before we get into the conversation, could you tell us a bit about yourself, your career history, and your role at Symfion?
Oh, sure. Okay, thank you. Symfion is a Dallas, Texas-based company. We've been in business since 1999. I'm CEO. We're the current world leader in print fleet cybersecurity. We protect print fleets, all the printers that make up the fleet at all times, and do it all as a service for customers. We're pretty much strongest and focused on very large fleets, and we're strongest in the healthcare industry because they're 247, 365 users of the print devices. Our fleets range from over 30,000 printers to down to 300 with some household names in there. We're partnered with many of your viewers, the print industry leaders, that they're reselling our solution to their customers. Some of the more forward-thinking, OEMs, the printer OEMs, and other managed print service providers. And really, our mission is to be the de facto standard for print fleet cybersecurity in the world.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting company because you've come from the IT industry and moved into print security. So before we talk about print fleet cybersecurity as a service, could you tell us a bit more about the background of the company and how you've moved into the print industry?
Yes, for sure. So in 2015, let's roll back 10 years to 2015. We were first introduced to the print industry through a relationship with a large printer OEM. We came from IT asset management. We had a CMDB and SCAP solution that we had supported large IT outsourcers, especially in healthcare, with for a number of years, and it was in a managed service offering. We also had done large enterprise system architecture and implementation, and we came into the industry and we noticed some unique things. Would you like to hear those, what we saw when we came in?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it'd be really interesting to hear, what some of the challenges you saw that your customers were facing.
Yeah. We saw a very mature industry. The printer endpoint industry it had grown up outside of information technology, and the endpoints weren't really managed like other IT endpoints. We saw a NIST standard. It's called risk management for replication devices. It's a U.S. Security standard, but it wasn't really being followed. We saw that all the manufacturers had done a fantastic job building in the rich feature base for protecting the devices, but they weren't being used. And the devices were being put on networks at what we call factory default. And even there was a human behavior like clicking on an email in security. The human behavior was reset it back to factory after a service. So, and those are really risky, to have those devices at factory defaults, because you've got things like administrator passwords that are published on the internet, the ports and protocols open. The big ones are like remote control communications like Telnet and IPP and FTP. We saw also that true IT asset lifecycle management, the cradle to grave following of the devices in this really complex, endpoint category with many of them are on wheels, was really immature and S&MP based with a lot of inaccuracy and no change control on the devices. And we saw really the big deal is we saw that everybody was competing on cost. So it was a really big cost push to eliminate costs from the print service delivery completely. And, to us, we saw an opportunity though, because we saw that 20% of almost everybody's networks endpoints were printers. They were vulnerable. We saw that each manufacturer made its own device management software that worked only on its own brand and in some of its models, and that, you know, there was no common access set of controls across the manufacturers for security controls, and that the message that the printer manufacturers were giving to the customers was really, brand specific, and there wasn't really a vendor agnostic solution out there. So that's what we saw when we first came in 2015 to the print industry.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, as you say, with print security, I think it's been on the radar, hasn't it, for a while for customers. But generally, the way the OEMs approach it is very much with proprietary solutions. As you say, there's often not compatibility across a vendor agnostic fleet. So, could you tell us a bit about how you moved into offering this vendor agnostic fleet that supports a mixed fleet environment?
Yes, yes. Okay, so roll forward to 2017. Then we've got the smartest engineers in the world, and we developed a vendor agnostic software product or products that even though there are it will control across all the security settings across all the devices, regardless of make, model, firmware version, age, type of a printer that's out there, and we put it into our managed service delivery model that we've been using since the early 2000s, and we launched it in August of 2018. It's to establish a basic IT best practices program for the health and the security of the devices. So, you roll forward to 2025, here we sit, we're seeing rapid adoptions. The criminals are doing the work for us, Louella. They're hacking, and you got state-sponsored actors coming after the U.S. companies from Russia, China, Iran, many others trying to steal the data, ransom, disrupt businesses. It's front page news, and all it takes is one of these printers to expose the whole enterprise. We've got also pushes for things like zero trust and standards adherence, and customers, they come to us where they've been hacked through a printer, or they failed audits, or hacked with the printer, failed audits, or the most common is that they've been breaking things with the OEM software and not able to deliver that with some kind of cobbled approach that has gaps in it.
Yeah, and I think what you really highlight there is the fact that there's a few real barriers to adoption around print security, and the challenges for IT teams to really understand the actual ability to protect their devices using different platforms from different vendors, but also the cost implications of potentially using a third-party platform as well, which can sometimes be that sort of inhibitor to adoption. So could you tell us a bit about the Symfion platform, how that works and how that addresses and alleviates some of those challenges?
Of course. Okay, so we named our solution. It's a total program, stem to stern, for print fleet cybersecurity. We call it Print Fleet Cybersecurity-as-a-Service because we named it what it does. And it's basically introducing cyber hygiene and maintaining that across all the printers in the fleet at all times. We deliver it as a turnkey service, so there's no operational lift for our customers or our reseller partners. We use professionals that are trained and mentored in our company. We call them concierges to do all the operation of our software. They're steeped in operating our software in printer security configuration and working in sensitive environments and customer service like the concierge, at the fancy hotels. And so, the solution is set. It is meant to be inclusive of all the makes, models, firmware version, so security is not tied to a brand, and it allows customers great flexibility to set the controls, to maintain the controls, to patch the devices, using the built-in security features that they've already paid for with our proven process and reporting on it all the time to prove it. So we've really adapted a standards-based approach to it, which is really a 360-degree protection approach for all the printers.
Yeah, so I wanted to just pick up on the fact you mentioned that you can leverage the features from each of the manufacturer's capabilities. So that means that you're able to provide this kind of holistic approach to secure printing across the fleet with your own technology and kind of integrate with their proprietary technology. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
In terms of, we mentioned, and sort of picking up on something mentioned earlier around the cost barrier to adoption, sometimes with print security, and often customers may not want to make a big investment in security without really understanding the benefits. And often they may think, well, actually, if I procure a certain print device or printer fleet, then they'll rely on that print technology and the security with features within that. And you mentioned you take a slightly different approach, and cost is one of the key areas that you focus on. So could you talk a bit about the pricing and the flexibility around the Symfion platform?
Absolutely. You cannot talk about printers without talking about price. Our solution, we knew when we designed it, it had to be highly affordable and a great, incredible value to it. We knew that, cost is always a factor, especially when you're adopting a new discipline. Like there has been no line item for print fleet cybersecurity. So what we did is we designed an inclusive per device price for our complete service. And we have levels, obviously, with 100 device increments, 1,000 device increments in the cost for a print fleet. But we also offer our contracts for 3 years, because security is not a destination. It's not a project. It requires vigilance. So it's a journey. We ride that journey with our customers, extending their team to this important discipline. So one of the hidden values of that approach to it is we're taking the print fleet, Louella, as it is when we get it. It may have 20-year-old devices in it. And we've seen over 20-year-old devices that, may not need to stay from a security standpoint, but we'll harden those to the abilities of the devices. We're taking that fleet as it is and as it becomes, because the big value is, look, our customers and our partners' customers have print fleets, and they're all different makes, models, firmware versions. There's complexity because each one behaves differently. There are hundreds of thousands. So we made it where we're going to ride over that with you and establish this discipline no matter how you change the fleet. So the old and the new, we're taking them all, and you can factually make decisions about, the security of the device based upon its capabilities, and we'll make those recommendations in the service to customers.
Yes, and I think that's a really important point, the fact you mentioned that you support an organization's legacy print infrastructure as well, so that if they have got devices that they want to keep, that you can support those. And I assume that they're backwards compatible with your technology, but I think that also demonstrates a slightly different approach to a traditional print manufacturer or OEM, who will be encouraging the customers potentially to upgrade those devices and replace those devices, because obviously they've got different requirements in terms of generating sales for their products. And it sounds like Symfion is, as a third-party vendor and independent, can help its customers secure and harden the devices it's already got without them needing to upgrade. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah. So we made it where they can, whatever they want to do. They don't want the security, the brand should not drive the security. The manufacturers have all done a fantastic job with incredible security features. They just haven't been used. And then you have to have a process to really turn that security up and monitor and maintain it without disrupting the customer. So yeah, it's the fleet as it is and the fleet as it becomes. And we'll make recommendations to the customer that, hey, maybe this device needs to be retired now because it's not securable to the standard that you want to keep. And that can be factually made. That decision can, based upon the information that we provide to them.
Yeah, so ultimately you're helping them future-proof the security of their complete print environment.
Yes.
So I just wanted to come back on the inclusive per device fee that you offer. So could you talk a bit more about what's included in that? Because it sounds like you offer this kind of complete service around professional services and implementation and so on. So could you talk a bit about, what capabilities are included in that fee?
We have a slide that we prepared for you. Let me just go over it. I don't want to go into super detail, but there's some real important key features. And we made this where the customers don't have any operational lift. They set up for us, we implement, we take them through the process of establishing this really important discipline for them, and we do it all for a per device fee. So the big important piece of it is it includes the Symphion software license, okay? And it also includes the concierge service to deliver the ongoing service for 3 years. So it's a total turnkey solution. We're including features like implementation of our software. It's included for 1,000 device fleets and greater. We also include a program management office. That's something that NIST they're a big proponent of that. And we saw that we needed that early on. What that is that's management consulting built in to guide the customer how to fit this important discipline into their IT ecosystem and how to change it as they change their controls, as they increase their business needs and things like that around this important vulnerable endpoint. So it rides with the service for 3 years. Security configuration management, establishing controls in the print fleet. And the biggest lift, Louella, is what we call testing and turn up of the controls, because you can't just go in and flip switches on the devices because they won't be able to be used. And in like a hospital setting, we're not just limited to hospitals and healthcare, but we see that they can't process patients. They risk the safety of the patients if they can't use the print service. It's so essential to them to do that. So we test each control before we turn it up. We test the firmware versions before we turn it up. The software monitors those controls, remediates them back. We have firmware patching, firmware deployment and management. We test those before we put them out on the devices. We back the devices up, and we have executive reporting, because in security, if you don't document it, it's not done. You have to prove it in security it's done. So we wrap all that into a base model of print fleet cybersecurity. We can also offer additional like security certificate deployment and management. That's a lot of technical stuff there, but it's basically all the stuff that you would want to have to operate a service like that delivered for you. The PMO, we've got the lessons learned, from it. IT professionals, they're really, really bright. They're steeped in other endpoints, but they don't really have a whole lot of cycles on this asset type. So we're here to help them introduce it, establish it, maintain it, and change it as they need to change it.
Yeah, so it's really an end-to-end service, isn't it, for your customers to understand their security vulnerabilities, put best practices in place. And I guess you also offer remediation and recovery as well. Is that correct, as part of that full service?
Well, we're not just identifying vulnerabilities. We're helping control those vulnerabilities, and the software will automatically monitor those settings a couple times a day and remediate them back to the settings, because that's really important, because what I talked about earlier, the human behavior, so to speak, that human behavior and security is a term used for like clicking on emails that you don't know where they came from. And that's like the biggest push in cybersecurity is to help prevent human behavior from exposing the company. Well, what we call a recurrence is where the print industry for 4 decades or so has set back the factory after a service. So that's, even if you've hardened the devices, they may reset it back to factory, and unless you're monitoring, you don't have the visibility to that, or the monitoring of the fleet inventory to see that a new device was swapped out and it maybe wasn't hardened to the control standard. We'll know that within the day and have it remediated. So, those are those are the kind of automated remediations that we built into the software.
Yes, and I think that's really interesting that you sort of mentioned the human factor because that's always, like you say, the first potential exposure for many cybersecurity risks. And it's the case in the print environment, both from an IT perspective and a employee perspective. And I think that leads quite nicely into in terms of some of the challenges you're seeing in the market, because I guess you've got some very large enterprise customers, particularly in healthcare. And I'd be interested to know what you're seeing in the market and any misconceptions as well that you're seeing around print security.
Okay, that's a great question, Louella. You're the Joe Rogan podcaster for the print industry. I got you. Okay, so there are really three or four that we see commonly in the industry. One is, a misconception around the risk. It's kind of like out of sight, out of mind is the way it's been with the printer endpoints. They've grown up in supply chain largely and procurement, and you know, folks don't understand, business executives don't understand that, almost to across almost every industry, the printer endpoints are 20% of their network endpoints, at least. And 99% of them are vulnerable. And it's not just an external risk, but there's prevalent risk caused by change in the device. The fleets they're on wheels, right? And they get changed around and there's not been change control. And, that puts the devices at risk. There's the physical access that's underestimated with the USB ports available on the devices, and they're sitting out like in the healthcare out in the middle of the hospital. You've got stored credentials that they don't know about that, the printer storing credentials that for the systems that it communicates with, often at a domain administrator level inside the printer for things like email servers, credential servers, file share servers when they're scanning to file it, and we have an education responsibility for that one right there. Nothing's perfect, but these standards are out there for a reason, and the misconception is under risk for many customers, but we're seeing that change. Another thing that we're seeing out there is what I talked about, the outage risk, the business interruption risk. That's why we put so much focus on testing, and before we turn up the security, and why we apply those disciplines to firmware and security, configuration management, the firmware updates, because most customers have done nothing and they don't understand the heavy lift that is that we're included in that price for them. Another thing that we're seeing, the cottage industry, call it cottage industry, that's not really accurate, but it's like what we're seeing a lot of is that customers are taking their vulnerability scanning software for their desktops, laptops, servers, network endpoints, and they're doing pen test scans on the printer fleet. And they're looking at all the outwardly facing vulnerabilities that the scanners won't log into the devices, and they're using that kind of to govern hardening of the devices. Well, it's a great start. It looks at all the exposed vulnerabilities, but it doesn't look at, most of the vulnerabilities are internal, like the credentials that we talked about, the communication credentials, the main administrator password, things like, does the device have a hard drive? Is it encrypted? At what level is it encrypted? What about the USB ports for data transfer? Is that turned on, the physical access risk of it? So, it overlooks some of the standards-based controls, but we're seeing it out there, and it's a great start for us because it's bringing it to Symfion, but it's not a complete solution. Probably the fourth thing that we see, what we're seeing out there, we're seeing that customers want to compare an apple to an orange. They want us to compare it to the cost of device OEM management software when we're doing it. It's kind of self-serving to say this, but I mean, that's what we're seeing is we're doing a total program with the software, the skilled labor, the management consulting, and being focused on devices, because these companies are household names that that are in the technology business in the printer industry. So they're going to listen to what they're saying because they're their trusted advisors for a long time. And they dial into the device management rather than looking at it as a whole fleet and how that builds dependency on that brand. And, you have to hire, manage, train, and hopefully recreate process, out of thin air that you had none. So, those are some of the things that we're seeing out there. They're pretty common in the marketplace.
One thing we haven't really talked about is the fact that businesses are still printing so much. And, I'm sure you see this a lot with your healthcare customers are still very reliant on print. And that by nature exposes them to risk if they don't have the right controls in place. But
Yes.
equally, a platform like Symfion and the sort of managed service that you offer gives them that, I guess, that trust and reassurance that there's ongoing management. And like you say, with the device manufacturers, the major OEMs, they'll take a slightly different approach, and they may not, with some channel partners, and I don't think this is doing a disservice to them, but they may not have the skills or the expertise from an IT perspective. So it would be better for them to partner with a company like Symphion or use that IT expertise rather than just have a siloed approach to print security. So, I think it's really innovative in the market to have something like this because we do see a bit of complacency around print security as well from an end user perspective, in that it's not top of their priority. But equally, if they just have one rogue device, it can have devastating consequences if that gets compromised. So, it's been really great to understand more about the Symfion print fleet cybersecurity-as-a-service platform. Is there anything else you wanted to share around the overall company strategy outside of print? Because I know you also work with companies like Zebra and IoT devices as well. And I think it'll be interesting to hear what you're seeing in those sectors.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question too. Okay, so we view printers as the most mature Internet of Things device. It's been around, printers have been around, the manufacturers have been competing based upon features and functionality. And one of the misconceptions out there, if we're talking about those again, is that the normal IT and business doesn't understand that you've got multiple servers built into each multifunction device. Have it, incredible communication protocols built in, the huge hard drive. It's really a complex IoT device, and it's configurable at a very, very highly configurable. The rest of IoT, and it's hallmarked by disparate operating systems and not common access like you have with Windows-based computing and other common operating systems. And so they're disparate. And like I said before, you've got all these different operating systems that can be affected by the make, the model, the age, the firmware version can even reset the device back to factory and introduce new features that aren't documented. All these kind of things that are out there. But we see that's where the whole IoT market is headed. So you see in the United States, we see that there are laws requiring configurability, basic stuff in the states that are coming up that are requiring the devices to be configurable for security. Some of our customers have engaged us in their IP camera hardening, for instance. So they're very prevalent in the criminals like to hack those, and they're configurable from a number of not even close to the level of printers, but they're configurable for security. They have firmware to be patched. They have communication protocols. They have administrator passwords, things of that nature that are out there. So we're focused on being the world leader in the de facto standard for print fleet cybersecurity, but our solution also applies to other IoT devices because of our technology-based approach to it in our vendor-agnostic technology approach.
Yeah, and I can see how that's a natural progression from moving from sophisticated IoT devices in the print industry, because, like you say, they've got hard disk drives and the connectivity and so on. And then the other IoT devices may not be as configurable, but they're still an access point potentially to the network. So it
Yes.
makes sense that you have the capabilities to support that. And Yeah, I think it's interesting to learn more about Symphion. So I really appreciate you taking time to share that. Where can the audience find out more information?
They can clearly go to Symphion.com. They can request a briefing with us. We do 30-minute briefings. In that we'll cover your goals, talk a little bit about answer any questions that you have about us. Give you a cost. We can give you a budgetary cost estimate in the first call. Or you could talk to one of our reseller partners. They're fantastic about introducing us and bringing us into the conversation too.
Yeah, that's great. And I highly recommend having a look at the Symfion website because it's got some great white papers and you talk about some of the challenges around areas like microsegmentation and some of the challenges that organizations will be facing when they're trying to protect print. So definitely encourage the viewers and listeners to take a look at your website. But thanks again for joining me today, Jim. It's been a really interesting conversation. So
Louella, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. We've been big fans for a long time.
thank you again for joining today's episode of In the Spotlight with QuoCirca. For more information, please go to quocirca.com and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.